The bones they are finding today are bigger than what we found in the first location.
How could this have happened in our community? How could it have gone on for so long?
He knew we had the evidence. He knew what was out there. He knew that people were out digging up his backyard.
Just outside Indianapolis, there's a mansion hidden in the woods. It has a long driveway, an indoor pool, and a chilling secret. For years, whispers echoed through local gay bars. A man calling himself Brian Smart was luring men to a house filled with mannequins, and they never came back. No one knew where the house was. No one knew his real name until one man made it out alive. That house, Fox Hollow Farm. And what investigators found there was more horrifying than anyone even imagined. And the man behind it wasn't some stranger. He was a husband, a father, a business owner. He lived in the suburbs, and his name was Herb Baumeister. This is the full story of the Fox Hollow Farm murders, of the victims who vanished, of the man who escaped, of the bones buried in the woods, and of the new owner who now lives in the house, swims in that same pool, and says he's not afraid. Herbert Richard Baumeister was born on April 7th, 1947, and the Baumeisters were really respected in the community. Herb was the oldest of 4 children, but from an early age, something was clearly off with him. As a child, he was described as odd and withdrawn, and in his teens, he began showing some disturbing behavior. Like, for instance, he once urinated on a teacher's desk and was reportedly fascinated with death and decay. His father actually had him committed to a psychiatric hospital where he was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and antisocial personality disorder. But in the 1960s, treatments were really limited, and Herb was eventually released. In 1971, he married Juliana Saiter, a high school teacher, and they had 3 children together. In 1988, the family purchased Fox Hollow Farm in Westfield, Indiana. It was a sprawling 18-acre estate with a large house, a horse stable, a wooded back property, and an indoor swimming pool. Around the same time, Herb actually opened up a chain of thrift stores called Save-A-Lot. Not affiliated with a grocery store, these were secondhand shops, and they actually did really well for them. Herb and Juliana appeared to be living the American dream, but their marriage, according to Juliana, was almost entirely platonic. Inside Fox Hollow Farm, things started to get very strange. The pool room where Herb liked to host guests was surrounded by mannequins, dozens of them, and he would dress them up in swimsuits and pose them around the pool, standing or reclining like people at an actual party. When he was asked why, he would say that it made the space feel, quote, less empty, but some guests said that it felt creepy, like a silent audience just watching them as they swam. Others noticed that Herb would spend hours down there alone and sometimes talking to the mannequins themselves. Serial killers have had a long fascination with mannequins. Like, if you think about Jeffrey Dahmer, he had reportedly stole a male mannequin from a department store and used it for companionship. For some killers, mannequins, I think, serve as silent witnesses, objects that never judge or speak up, but are always there with them and always watching. In Herb's case, he posed mannequins around his indoor pool, dressing them in swimsuits and arranging them in lifelike positions. Some believe that he did this to create an illusion of an audience. Others think it was about control. You know, his ability to stage and manipulate and dominate a scene that no one else could enter. It's chilling to imagine the crimes that may have happened in that space under the watch of these lifeless figures. Between 1980 and 1991, a series of young gay men began disappearing in and around Indianapolis. At least 11 bodies were found along Interstate 70, often dumped in rural areas. The media dubbed the killer the I-70 Strangler, and police believed the same person was behind all of them, but they had no solid leads. Meanwhile, back at Fox Hollow Farms, Herb's behavior was growing more erratic. He became increasingly reclusive and spent more and more time away from his family. He told Juliana, his wife, that he was working, but she said that he was often gone for days without any explanation. Lately, I feel like the internet just knows too much about me. I'll say something out loud and then boom, there's an ad for exactly what I was talking about. So I started digging, and it turns out my personal information is being sold. Phone number, home address, even my relatives, just floating around on these shady sites called data brokers. Data brokers compile your personal information and sell it to the highest bidders, all without your consent. Legally, data brokers have to remove your information if you ask, but they make it extremely difficult to do so. That is why I signed up for Aura, today's sponsor. Aura automatically removes your info from all these shady data broker sites, and they keep checking so that it stays off. But Aura is more than that. It's a full digital security system, real-time alerts if your info hits the dark web, tools to block credit fraud, a secure VPN, password manager, antivirus, and even $5 million in identity theft insurance. Aura truly helped me take control back of my digital life. Try it free for 14 days at aura.com/MattCullen. Seriously, you will be shocked at what's out there. Thank you, Aura, for sponsoring today's video, and now back to the video. In 1994, a man named Tony Harris, now known as Mark Goodyear, met a man who introduced himself as Brian Smart at a gay bar called the Varsity Lounge. Brian was charming, but strange. He invited Harris back to a house in the suburbs, where there was a pool and, strangely enough, mannequins. During their time together, Brian encouraged Tony to try erotic asphyxiation. Tony agreed, but as things escalated, he became frightened and he was able to escape. For weeks, Tony tried to track down Brian Smart. Eventually, he saw that same man again at the bar and followed him to his car and wrote down his license plate. The plate led police to, surprisingly enough, Herb himself. Police wanted to search his property, but Herb and Juliana refused, and without probable cause, investigators were stuck. Later that year, their son Eric discovered a human skull while playing in the backyard. When he brought it to his father, Herb said that it was an old anatomical model from his father's medical collection, and Juliana accepted that explanation at that time. But by 1996, Juliana had enough. She filed for divorce and told police that they could search the property. That is when investigators discovered one of the most gruesome crime scenes in American history.
The investigation has recovered more than 150 bone fragments and covers a 1-acre tract that now includes at least 2 separate properties along 156th Street. Hamilton County authorities have invested considerable time, money, and manpower into the investigation, but they will not comment on their findings other than to state the obvious.
I would consider it bizarre. I mean, we're finding human bones. It's not at a gravesite.
Over 10,000 burned and crushed human bones and fragments were scattered throughout the wooded area behind the house. Forensic teams estimated that at least 11 individuals had been killed and buried there. Some of the bones recovered at Fox Hollow Farms bore clear signs of torture. Multiple skulls were found with holes punched clean through, suggesting the use of a blunt object like a hammer. Others had scorch marks, possibly from being burned while the victim was still alive. Several victims had been dismembered, and not with surgical precision, but with brute force, as though Herb had just used whatever he had on hand at that moment. The ribs were cracked from strangulation, jawbones smashed in, and spinal columns that had been separated by force. One investigator described finding a femur with deep grooves etched into the bone, as though someone had repeatedly struck it with a blade. Forensic pathologists said the trauma suggested prolonged suffering. These men didn't die instantly, and in some cases, they may have been restrained. Before Herb fled to Canada, things had started to unravel. After the police had discovered the remains at Fox Hollow Farm, media outlets quickly picked up the story. But even then, there was no immediate arrest. Instead, he was brought in for questioning, but released. His privilege, wealth, and the general disinterest of law enforcement when it comes to crimes involving gay men allowed him time to vanish. Herb told his children that he needed to go on a business trip. Instead, he drove north. He crossed the border into Canada, checked into Pinery Provincial Park in Ontario, and spent several days camping all alone. On July 3rd, 1996, he was found dead with a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Next to his body was a 3-page suicide note. In it, he blamed his failing business and his collapsing marriage, and not once did he admit guilt. That silence left a hole that could never be filled. With his death, any chance of a trial or a confession was now out the window. For many of the victims' families, it felt like justice had been stolen from them for a second time. But that wasn't the end of the story. In the years that followed, the bones sat largely untouched in storage, too fragmented to identify with the technology available at that time. That thankfully changed in 2020 when coroner Jeff Jellison teamed up with the DNA Dope Project and Othram Labs. Using advanced genetic genealogy, they began identifying the remains. As of 2024, at least 12 victims have been named. Some of the identified victims include Alan Livingston, Manuel Resendez, Jeffrey Jones, and Daniel Davis. Most were gay men between the ages of 20 and 40. Many had been reported missing, but had been dismissed by police as runaways or assumed to have left town. Their families were told that there was nothing to worry about. In several cases, missing persons reports were barely investigated, if they were filed at all. The fact that the victims were gay played a major role into how this case unfolded. In the 1980s and 90s, gay men were often treated as disposable by the law enforcement. The AIDS crisis was raging. Police in Indianapolis were known for their hostility towards the gay community. Some bars had been raided repeatedly, and when young gay men just started disappearing, their cases didn't get attention. This meant that even as bodies were being found along I-70, there was really no pressure to connect the dots. Once Herb was identified as a suspect and then took his own life, many in the law enforcement and the media essentially considered this case closed. There was no trial, no cross-examination, no deep dive into whether he had help or whether other victims were still out there. His death was treated as kind of a final chapter in the case. But for the families, and for much of the gay community, it didn't feel like closure. It felt like abandonment. Even now, decades later, there are strong opinions about how this case was handled. The Hulu documentary, The Secret of Fox Hollow Farm, brought new attention to the case, but also controversy. One of the main figures in the doc is Mark Goodyear, who, if you remember we talked about earlier, was Tony Harris, who had managed to escape Herb and then wrote down the license plate. He presents himself as a man who helped break the case open, but many viewers were disturbed by his behavior.
Let me ask you, what do you think? Am I the evil culprit, the accomplice? I'd like to know how the audience views me.
He spoke in riddles, made cryptic statements, and often contradicted himself. At one point he said, quote, "I'm not trying to do 25, which some interpreted as a reference to prison time. Online forums like Reddit lit up with theories. One comment read, quote, "He absolutely helped Herb. They were in it together. He turned on Herb before Herb could turn on him." I think Mark was more involved than he lets on. He knew too many details about where things were buried, too calm, too familiar with it all. Others pointed to the emotional manipulation, quote, "He's playing the victim, but it feels rehearsed." Several commenters noted how Mark seemed to really enjoy the camera. He smiled while recalling events, laughing at odd moments, and appeared to be more concerned with how he looked than what he was actually saying. Others argued that he may have been the one introducing Herb to victims, whether knowingly or unknowingly. A few of the more chilling theories suggest that Mark might have even been present during some of the murders. Some viewers pointed to moments in the doc where he referenced the layout of the pool area and the woods with unsettling familiarity. One commenter wrote, quote, "He wasn't describing it like someone who had visited once. He was talking like someone who lived it." Again, this is purely speculative and has not been substantiated by law enforcement at all. But the idea persists, especially among those who feel like his on-camera behavior was too performative and too casual, especially given the horror of these crimes. Some even questioned whether Mark tried to cash in on the story long before Hulu got involved. He's reportedly approached numerous production companies over the years, and some allege that he tried to sell a dramatized version of the story, with himself as the lead. While he denies this, the speculation continues. And finally, there's this new theory that Mark and Rob Graves, who is actually the current owner of Fox Hollow Farms, may be working together more closely than they've let on. He lives in that house and he swims in that pool where the men were allegedly killed. He participates in paranormal investigations and ghost tours. In interviews, he has actually spoken about hearing unexplained voices and seeing shadows.
When we first got here, we decided that we were going to try to put all this behind us, but you can't get away from it. It's always that place.
He also appeared in the Hulu doc, giving tours of the property. He wrote a book about it, he sells merchandise, he allows film crews into the house. It's hard to ask, like, where is the line between preservation and exploitation? As of mid-2025, forensic teams are still working through the remains. Coroner Jeff Jellison has said that he believes there could be as many as 25 or more victims. Some of the bone fragments may never be matched to names. Others could take years to identify. Families are still submitting DNA to help with the process. In spring of 2025, another body was identified, Daniel Thomas Halloran. His daughter spoke publicly, saying, quote, "I always wondered where he went. We thought maybe he just left and didn't want to be found, but deep down I knew something was wrong. Now at least I know. Now we can bury him." Her voice joins a growing number of families who are finally getting answers. But the fact that it took over 30 years and private funding and public documentaries to even get here says a lot about who gets justice in this country and who doesn't. The story of Fox Hollow Farm is not over. It's still unfolding. And it raises just so many questions. How many people did Herb actually kill? Was he the I-70 strangler? Did he act alone? What role did Mark Goodyear actually play? And what kind of person chooses to live in that house today? Maybe we'll get answers and maybe we won't. To the families who now have names and closure, who waited decades to finally find out what happened to their brothers or their friends or their family, my heart is truly with you. And to the families who may never get answers, who still wonder if their loved ones were one of the people unidentified, I'm thinking of you too, because you deserve peace and you deserve justice. If you have theories about what had happened, leave them in the comments. I learned so much about these cases from different subreddits and different comment threads, and I'm curious to read what you think really happened. And if you know of another case that you would like to see me dive into next, email me at matthewlcullen@gmail.com. While I naturally just focus on queer stories, I'm also drawn to any case that centers people whose voices often go unheard, whether that's women, people of color, or other marginalized communities. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching. I hope you're doing well, and I will see you very soon with another video. Bye.